All right, so you guys are always sharing these really cool articles and ideas about self-driven learning.
Yeah,
Well, today we're going to do a deep dive into what that actually means, like how you can use it to learn better, whatever it is you're trying to learn.
I love that. And there was that one article, Self-Driven Learners Path to Autonomous Knowledge Acquisition
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
by Shiva Narayan Takshila, that really kind of set the stage for me, at least. It was like, oh, this is what it means to really take control. Like, it
Right.
wasn't just theory.
No.
It had actionable stuff.
And that's what we're all about here,
Yeah,
right? Like practical things you can actually do.
absolutely.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
So self-driven learning at its core, it's about you being in charge,
Yeah.
right? You're not just sitting back and waiting for someone to teach you. You're out there seeking knowledge.
Right.
You're setting your own goals. You're figuring out how to manage your time
Yes.
so you can actually achieve those goals,
Okay.
and you're using strategies that work for you to understand things at like a deeper level.
Yeah, I think it really goes against what a lot of us have been taught about learning, you know?
Totally.
It's like the opposite of just sitting there in class and being like, all right, tell me what I need to know.
Right. Just passively absorbing information.
Right.
Right. And the thing is, and tell me if you agree with this, but it seems like when you're really the one driving the learning process,
Right.
the benefits are huge. I mean, you become more
Okay.
adaptable. You become a lifelong learner. You're not afraid to tackle new things.
Totally. I totally agree. And the article kind of touches on that, with that whole concept of becoming more adaptable, like in today's world.
Yeah.
Things are changing so fast.
All the time.
You can't just rely on what you learned in school or even a few years ago.
You got to be constantly learning and evolving.
Right. You got to keep up.
Okay. So to really get this idea of self-driven learning,
Yeah.
let's flip the script for a second
Okay.
and talk about passive learning.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like in practice?
Hmm.
And why should it matter to you, like in your everyday life?
Well, the article describes passive learning as kind of like the traditional model, right? Like
Mhm.
think back to when you were sitting in a classroom or maybe you're in like a work training session.
Yeah, totally.
You're basically relying on someone else, like a teacher or an instructor,
Right.
to guide you. They're choosing what you learn. They're setting the pace. It's all coming from them.
It's so externally driven.
Right. You're just kind of there to absorb the information like a sponge.
And you can see how that might not always be the most effective approach,
Yeah.
right? If you're not actively engaged in the process,
Exactly.
if you're not asking questions, if you're not really trying to make connections, it's easy for the information to just kind of go in one ear and out the other.
Yeah, it's like you're being told what to think instead of actually thinking for yourself.
Exactly. And the article talks about how this kind of passive learning can lead to you just don't remember things as well.
Yeah, lower retention.
Right. You're not really understanding things at a deep level. And you might even feel less engaged with the material overall.
Yeah, and it also kind of emphasizes rote memorization, which I think we've all experienced.
Totally like cramming for a test.
Exactly, and then you forget everything the next day.
Right. It's like, what was the point?
Right.
And I think a lot of us have probably been in those situations where we felt like we were just drowning in information.
Yeah,
We're trying to take it all in, but it's just not sticking.
totally.
And I think this is where the shift to self-driven learning and this idea of brain page mastery that the article talks about becomes really important.
Yeah, that's a really cool concept, I think, that can help people really take their learning to the next level.
Okay, so break down brain page mastery for us.
All right, so brain page mastery is like when you're not just passively reading or listening, you're actively creating a mental model of the information in your brain.
Like you're building your own little knowledge map.
Right. It's like
Yeah.
taking notes. But
Yeah.
in your head, you're summarizing, you're connecting different ideas, you're really making the knowledge your own.
You're the architect of your own understanding.
Exactly. And self-driven learners are like the masters of brain page mastery. They're motivated, they're curious, they're disciplined.
Right? They're not waiting for someone else to tell them what to do.
Right. They're the ones who are like, I want to learn this and I'm going to find a way to make it happen.
And the article uses this phrase, brain page modules of knowledge transfer in book-to-brain learnography.
Yeah, it sounds a bit technical.
Yeah, a little bit, but what it's really getting at is that self-driven learners are actively processing and structuring information in their minds as they're learning.
Yeah, and it kind of emphasizes that connection between what you're reading or hearing and what's actually happening in your brain.
It's like you're creating these neural pathways
Right.
that make the information stick.
Exactly.
And the article contrasts this with what it calls forced learning,
Yeah.
which is often the experience for passive learners.
Right.
So can you explain what forced learning is and why it might not be the most effective way to learn?
So forced learning is basically when you're learning because you have to, not because you want to.
Like you're being forced to watch a training video for work.
Exactly. Or you have to study for a test that you don't really care about.
I've been there.
It's all about external pressure.
Yeah, deadlines, grades, things like that.
Right. And while you might get through it in the short term, the article really emphasizes that it doesn't lead to deep understanding or long-term retention.
Right, because the motivation isn't really there.
Exactly.
So it's like you're just going through the motions. And the article talks about how this can actually be kind of detrimental to your learning.
Yeah, it can make you feel like learning is a chore.
Yeah.
Which can really turn you off from wanting to learn anything at all.
And that's where the article proposes a different approach, right?
Yeah.
Moving away from this forced learning and towards self-driven learning.
Exactly. And it talks about using concepts like motor science and brainpage development and reciprocal learnography as ways to make learning more engaging and effective.
And it even mentions activating the substantia nigra
Right.
and using cyclizide rehearsal.
I love those terms.
Right. And these are all about tapping into the brain's natural reward system to make learning more enjoyable and more likely to stick.
Yeah, it's like hacking your brain to learn better.
Exactly.
Right.
All right. So we've talked about the difference between passive learning and self-driven learning and this idea of brain page mastery.
Right.
But let's get down to brass tacks here.
Okay.
What are the actual characteristics of a self-driven learner? And more importantly, how can our listeners develop these characteristics themselves?
All right, so the article breaks down these characteristics really nicely.
Okay.
And the first one is intrinsic motivation.
Okay, so what does that mean?
So intrinsic motivation means you're learning because you're genuinely interested in the subject. It's not about getting a good grade or impressing your boss.
Right. It's about that pure joy of learning.
Exactly.
You're curious. You want to know more. You're driven by that internal desire.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us have experienced this at some point, you know? Like maybe you get really into a hobby.
Yeah.
And you just spend hours and hours researching it and learning everything you can about it.
And it doesn't even feel like work.
Right, because you're so interested in it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how can people tap into that intrinsic motivation?
Well, I think it starts with being honest with yourself about what you're actually interested in.
Okay.
Like, what are you naturally drawn to? What do you find yourself thinking about when you have free time?
What gets you excited?
Right, and once you identify those things,
Yeah.
you can start exploring them in more depth.
Make learning a joy again.
Exactly.
All right, so intrinsic motivation, that's number one. What's the next characteristic?
So the next one is being goal-oriented.
Okay.
Self-driven learners are very intentional about their learning. They set clear goals for themselves, both short-term and long-term.
Right, they have a vision of where they want to go with their learning.
Exactly. And these goals give them a sense of direction and purpose.
It's not just random exploration. It's like you're on a mission.
Right. And having those goals helps you stay motivated.
Totally.
Even when things get tough.
So how can our listeners become more goal-oriented in their own learning?
Well, I think a good place to start is to ask yourself what you actually want to achieve.
Yeah.
Like, what are your learning aspirations?
Hmm.
Do you want to master a new skill?
Yeah.
Do you want to understand a particular topic in more depth?
Yeah.
Once you know what you want to achieve,
Yeah.
you can start breaking down those big goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Make it less overwhelming.
Right, and then you can create a plan for how you're going to achieve those steps.
I love it. Okay, so intrinsic motivation, we've got goals. What's next?
The next one is being curious and inquisitive.
I bet.
Self-driven learners are constantly asking questions.
Yeah.
They want to know why things are the way they are.
They want to understand the how and the why.
Exactly. They're not afraid to challenge assumptions or dig deeper into a topic.
And they're not satisfied with just surface level knowledge.
Right. They want to get to the heart of the matter.
So how can people cultivate this curiosity?
Well, I think it starts with embracing your inner child.
Okay.
You know, remember when you were a kid and you were constantly asking why and how and what if?
Yeah, everything was fascinating.
Well, try to tap back into that sense of wonder.
Don't lose that.
Don't be afraid to ask questions, even if they seem silly or basic.
Yeah, because often those are the questions that lead to the most profound insights.
Exactly. And the more you ask, the more you'll learn.
Love it. Okay, so intrinsic motivation goals, curiosity. What else have we got?
The fourth characteristic is being resilient and adaptive.
Okay.
So self-driven learners don't give up easily. They know that learning can be challenging.
Yeah.
And they're prepared to face setbacks and obstacles.
They don't let those setbacks define them.
Right. They view them as opportunities to learn and grow.
It's like that growth mindset.
Exactly.
You know, where you see challenges as a chance to improve.
Right. And they're also really good at adapting their learning strategies as needed.
Hmm.
So if something's not working, they're not afraid to try something different.
To pivot.
Exactly.
So how can our listeners become more resilient and adaptable in their own learning?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that setbacks are a normal part of the process.
Everyone experiences them.
Right. And instead of getting discouraged by them,
Yeah.
try to view them as valuable feedback.
Yeah.
What can you learn from this experience? How can
Yeah.
you adjust your approach going forward?
Love it. All right. So intrinsic motivation goals,
Mhm.
curiosity, resilience. What's next?
The next one is being independent problem solvers.
Okay.
So self-driven learners are very resourceful.
Hmm.
They're not afraid to tackle problems on their own.
They don't run to someone else for help at the first sign of trouble.
Yeah, right. They try to figure things out for themselves first.
And that builds confidence.
Exactly. And it also helps them develop their critical thinking skills.
It's like you're training your brain to be more independent.
Right.
So how can people become better problem solvers?
Well, I think it starts with believing in yourself.
Okay.
You know, you have the ability to solve problems.
Yeah.
You just need to trust your instincts and be willing to experiment.
Don't be afraid to try things and see what works.
Exactly. And if you do get stuck,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to ask for help.
Right. But try to exhaust all your own resources first.
Right.
I love it. All right. So we've got intrinsic motivation goals, curiosity, resilience, independent problem solving. What else?
Number 6 is being effective time managers.
Well, this is a big one.
It is.
I think a lot of people struggle with this.
Yeah.
Just finding the time to learn.
Yeah, especially with our busy lives.
Right. We're all so busy.
Yeah.
So how can people become better time managers?
Well, I think it starts with recognizing that time management is a skill.
Right. It's something you can learn and improve upon.
Exactly. And there are a lot of different techniques and tools out there that can help.
Like what kind of things?
Well, one thing that can be really helpful is to schedule dedicated time for learning.
Like block it out in your calendar.
Exactly. Treat it like an important appointment.
Yeah. Don't let other things encroach on that time.
Right. And another helpful tip is to break down your learning tasks into smaller chunks.
Make it less daunting.
Exactly. And then you can spread those chunks out over time.
So you're trying to cram everything in at once.
Right. And it's also really important to eliminate distractions
Yes.
when you're trying to learn.
Put your phone away. Turn off the TV.
Exactly. Create a focused learning environment.
Okay, so effective time management, super important. What's the last characteristic?
The final one is being self-reflective.
I like that.
Self-driven learners are constantly evaluating their learning process.
They're asking themselves what's working, what's not working.
Exactly. They're thinking about their strengths and weaknesses.
And they're looking for ways to improve.
Right. They're not afraid to experiment with different learning strategies and see what works best for them.
So how can our listeners become more self-reflective in their own learning?
Well, I think a good place to start is to keep a learning journal.
Okay.
Write down what you're learning, how you're learning it, and what challenges you're facing.
And what's working well?
Exactly. And then you can go back and review your journal periodically.
And look for patterns.
Right. And see what insights you can gain.
Love it. Okay. So we've covered the 7 characteristics of a self-driven learner.
Mm-hmm.
Intrinsic motivation goals, curiosity, resilience, independent, problem-solving, effective time management, and self-reflection.
Quite the list.
It is, right.
But it's all achievable.
It is with practice.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about what self-driven learning is.
Yeah.
And we've talked about the characteristics of a self-driven learner.
Right.
But how does this all translate into the real world?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why should our listeners care about this beyond just the theory?
That's a great question. And the article actually highlights several real-world applications of self-driven learning.
Okay, let's hear them.
So firstly, in terms of professional growth and career development, self-driven learners are really well equipped to thrive in today's rapidly changing work environments.
Yeah, because they're adaptable, they're proactive, they're always learning new things.
Exactly. They're not afraid to take on new challenges, and they're always looking for ways to improve their skills.
And that makes them super valuable to employers.
Right, because they're not relying on their company to provide all the training and development.
They're taking ownership of their own careers.
Exactly.
Okay, so professional growth, what else?
Well, in the realm of entrepreneurship and innovation, self-driven learning is essential.
Yeah, because entrepreneurs are constantly having to learn new things and adapt to new situations.
Right. They need to be able to identify emerging trends,
Mhm.
develop new skills, and solve complex problems.
And they often have to do it on their own.
Exactly. They don't have a boss or a teacher to guide them.
So they have to be self-directed.
Right.
Okay, so professional growth entrepreneurship. What else?
The article also highlights the importance of self-driven learning in research and scientific inquiry.
Yeah, because researchers are always pushing the boundaries of knowledge.
Right. They're constantly asking questions, exploring new ideas, and challenging existing theories.
And they have to be able to learn independently.
Yeah, because they're often working on cutting-edge research.
Right. There's no textbook for that.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
they have to be able to find information, synthesize it, and apply it to their own work.
Okay, so professional growth entrepreneurship research. What else?
Well, with the rise of online learning platforms and what the article calls brainpage classrooms, self-driven learning is becoming increasingly important in academics and personalized learning.
Yeah, because it allows students to tailor their education to their own interests and learning styles.
Exactly. They're not just passively absorbing information.
Right. They're actively engaging with the material.
And they're choosing what they want to learn and how they want to learn it.
So it's more efficient and more effective.
Exactly.
Okay. So professional growth, entrepreneurship, research academics. What else?
And finally, in the area of self-improvement and personal mastery, self-driven learning empowers you to continuously expand your abilities and knowledge.
Yeah, whether it's learning a new language or mastering a musical instrument.
Exactly. Or just delving into a new hobby.
Right. It's all about expanding your horizons and becoming a more well-rounded individual.
Exactly. And this commitment to personal growth not only enhances your skill set,
Yeah.
but it also improves your cognitive abilities, your emotional intelligence, and your overall well-being.
So it's really a holistic approach to self-development.
Exactly.
So as you can see, the benefits of self-driven learning are far-reaching.
Absolutely.
It's not just about academic or professional success.
Right.
It's about personal growth, fulfillment, and adaptability.
It's about becoming a lifelong learner.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in wrapping up this deep dive, I think it's clear that making that shift from passive learning to self-driven learning is really crucial in today's world. This taxila model and this idea of learnography, they offer a really powerful framework for becoming more autonomous and more effective learners.
Absolutely.
So as we leave you today, we want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What's one area of your life where you think adopting a more self-driven approach to learning could make a real difference?
Yeah.
And what's one small step you can take today
Right now.
to start moving in that direction?
And maybe exploring the Taxila page or learnography further could give you some more ideas and inspiration.
That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.
See you next time.